You know what I think, Bryce? I think she stole that suit too. Probably walked right out of Nordstrom with it.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Check the tags. Bet they're still on.
Look at her, stone quiet. That's the guilty look right there.
At 5:47 a.m. inside Reagan National Airport, the terminal was nearly empty. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile, clinical glow across the polished floors. A few early travelers shuffled toward security with coffee cups in hand and eyes still heavy with sleep, while the checkpoint machines beeped in a steady, monotonous rhythm. Nothing about the morning suggested that anything unusual was about to happen. A black woman in her early 50s walked through the terminal with the kind of quiet authority that comes from decades of commanding courtrooms. She wore a tailored charcoal suit, perfectly pressed. Her carry-on rolled behind her in a smooth, practiced motion. Her posture was straight and her pace was unhurried. She had done this walk 1,000 times. This was Judge Vivian Hartwell, a federal appeals court judge on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. She had been appointed by the President of the United States 3 years earlier after a unanimous Senate confirmation. Before her appointment, she had spent 18 years as a federal prosecutor trying high-stakes cases that put cartel leaders and corrupt politicians behind bars. She was traveling to Chicago for the National Judicial Conference, where she was scheduled to deliver the keynote address on civil rights and judicial integrity. Her credentials were impeccable, and her reputation was spotless. She had dedicated her life to the law and to the fundamental belief that justice should apply equally to everyone, regardless of who they were or what they looked like. But in the next 12 minutes, none of that would matter to the two officers who were already watching her from across the terminal. What they didn't realize was that their body cameras were recording every word and every action. Everything that was about to happen would be captured in high-definition video, footage that would eventually reach the desks of the highest officials in the White House. Officer Bryce Kessler stood near the security checkpoint with his arms crossed, scanning the terminal the way a predator watches a watering hole. He was 44 years old, stocky, with a shaved head and a permanent scowl etched into his face. 16 years with the Reagan National Airport Police Department had taught him one thing. He felt he could do whatever he wanted as long as he used the right technical buzzwords in his reports. His record should have ended his career years ago. He had 31 complaints over 14 years involving racial profiling, excessive force, intimidation, and harassment. Every single complaint had been reviewed by Internal Affairs and dismissed. Witnesses often recanted or victims simply stopped returning calls. Supervisors wrote phrases like unsubstantiated or insufficient evidence and filed the paperwork away where it would never see daylight. Kessler had learned how to work the system. He knew that as long as he claimed someone was evasive, matched a description, or exhibited suspicious behavior, no one would question him. His colleagues called him old school. Some of the younger officers admired his toughness, while others quietly requested transfers after working just a few shifts by his side. His partner that morning was Officer Danny Stokes, 29 years old, with 5 years on the job. Stokes was tall and lean, possessing the eager energy of someone still trying to prove himself. He laughed at Kessler's jokes, nodded at his opinions, and never once questioned his calls. When Kessler moved, Stokes followed. When Kessler spoke, Stokes agreed. Kessler's eyes locked onto a figure moving through the terminal, a black woman in an expensive suit, walking with an air of absolute confidence. Something about her bothered him. It was the posture, the poise, and the way she didn't look down when she passed him. He nudged Stokes with his elbow. "Watch this one," he muttered. Judge Hartwell had already cleared security and was walking toward Gate 23 when she heard the voice behind her. "Ma'am, stop right there." She stopped and turned slowly, her carry-on coming to rest beside her. The two airport police officers approached. The older one had his hand resting on his duty belt, fingers just inches from his weapon. "Is there a problem, officer?" Her voice was calm and measured, the same tone she used when attorneys in her courtroom tried to grandstand. Kessler stepped closer than necessary, his eyes moving over her suit and jewelry, a black woman moving through his terminal like she had every right to be there, looking him in the eye like an equal, irritated him in a way he couldn't articulate. "You fit a description," he said. We had a theft reported earlier this morning, someone matching your appearance." Hartwell's expression didn't change. I'm a federal judge with the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. I am traveling to Chicago on official judicial business. I've been through security and I'm heading to my gate." Kessler's lips curled into a smirk, the kind of smirk that said he'd heard every excuse and every desperate attempt to talk out of trouble. "Sure you are," he replied. Stokes shifted his weight behind his partner, positioning himself to block her path. Nearby, a businessman slowed his pace to watch, and a young woman at a coffee kiosk looked up from her phone. Kessler's body camera blinked red on his chest, recording everything. He didn't seem to care. "I'm going to need to see some identification," Kessler demanded. Judge Hartwell took a slow breath. She had handled hostile witnesses and violent defendants. She knew how to stay calm when others wanted her to break. "I'm going to reach into my bag for my credentials," she said clearly. I'm moving slowly so there is no misunderstanding." She unzipped the front pocket of her carry-on and retrieved a leather folder. Inside was her federal judicial identification card, her state bar card, and her official travel itinerary. She handed them to Kessler. He looked at the judicial ID for less than 3 seconds. He flipped the bar card over like it was a grocery store receipt and didn't bother reading the itinerary. "These could be fake," he said, tossing the folder back toward her. It hit her chest and fell to the floor. "Anyone can print stuff like this. Doesn't prove anything." Stokes nodded in agreement. "We see fake IDs all the time." Hartwell bent down slowly and picked up her credentials. Her hands were steady, but her jaw tightened. "Officer, I am a sitting federal appeals court judge appointed by the president. You can verify my identity with one phone call to the U.S. Marshals Service." Kessler stepped even closer, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "I'll verify what I want to verify. Now turn around." He didn't step back, he stepped forward. The mask of professional detachment was slipping, revealing something uglier. "People like you," he said, his voice low but sharp. "Think a fancy suit means you're above the law. Think you can walk through here like the rules don't apply to you?" Hartwell met his eyes without flinching. "I'd like your badge number, officer, in the name of your supervisor." Kessler didn't respond. He didn't even acknowledge the request. His hand moved to his cuffs. Stokes shifted to the right, closing off any path she might have taken to walk away. A crowd began to form. A young woman had her phone raised, camera pointed directly at the confrontation. Kessler noticed the phone and barked, "Put that away. This is official police business. You're interfering with an investigation." The woman hesitated but didn't lower her phone. Her hands trembled, but she kept recording. Kessler turned back to Hartwell, his patience gone. "Last chance, turn around now." Judge Hartwell spoke slowly and clearly, making sure her voice carried to the witnesses. "I am not resisting. I am complying with your instructions. But I am also telling you, officer, that you are making a serious mistake. This will not end the way you think it will." Something in Kessler's expression snapped. He grabbed her right arm and wrenched it behind her back. The motion was violent and completely unnecessary. Before she could react, his other hand slammed into her upper back, driving her forward. Judge Vivian Hartwell hit the terminal floor face first. The sound was sickening, a dull crack followed by a sharp gasp from the crowd. Her glasses flew from her face and shattered. Her briefcase burst open, scattering legal documents and her judicial robe across the tile. "Stop resisting," Stokes shouted, driving his knee into the center of her back. "Stop resisting," Kessler echoed, pinning her wrists together. She was not resisting. She lay completely still, her cheek pressed against the cold tile, blood beginning to trickle from a gash above her eyebrow. 6 civilian phones and 2 body cameras captured every second. The red lights blinked silently, preserving what would become the most damning footage of police brutality the country had seen in years. For a moment, at the terminal was silent. Then the crowd erupted. "That's a federal judge," a businessman shouted. "What the hell are you doing? She showed you her ID." Stokes snapped the handcuffs into place with a cold finality. Hartwell said nothing. No protest, no cry of pain. She knew that her silence was her weapon. Everything was being recorded, and she knew the law better than anyone in that building. Lieutenant Cheryl Davenport arrived in under 4 minutes. The scene stopped her cold. A bloodied woman in a torn charcoal suit, surrounded by a crowd of angry travelers and scattered judicial documents. She picked up the leather folder from the floor. Inside, the name read, Vivian Hartwell, United States Circuit Judge. Davenport's face went pale. "Bryce?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you know who this is?" It was already far too late. Within 12 minutes, the White House had been notified. The president was briefed within the hour. By mid-morning, the DOJ Civil Rights Division was activated, and FBI agents were dispatched to secure all evidence. Federal marshals arrived to ensure Judge Hartwell received medical attention and protection. Kessler and Stokes had their badges and weapons confiscated immediately. This was no longer a local matter. It was a federal case moving at lightning speed. Federal prosecutors reviewed the body camera footage in a silent conference room. They watched Kessler glance at her ID for 3 seconds before throwing it at her. They heard him say, "I don't care if you're the Queen of England." They watched the brutal slam. A senior prosecutor remarked, "Wow, that is the clearest case of civil rights violation I've seen in 20 years. The investigation expanded into the department's history. They found that supervisors had known about Kessler's behavior for years, using phrases like the usual suspects to dismiss complaints. The cover-up was institutional. Within 48 hours, the president released a statement calling the assault an affront to the rule of law. Officer Bryce Kessler was arrested 3 days later at his home. He was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, assault of a federal official, and filing a false police report. Bail was denied. Officer Danny Stokes was also arrested, charged with conspiracy and failure to intervene. The fallout didn't stop there. 3 supervisors were fired, and the airport police chief resigned. The entire department was placed under a federal consent decree. The trial was a media sensation. 14 prior victims testified about their own encounters with Kessler, exposing a decade-long niche of systemic profiling. When Judge Hartwell took the stand, she was calm and precise. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Kessler was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Stokes received 3. 6 weeks after the assault, Judge Vivian Hartwell returned to the bench. The gash above her eyebrow had healed into a thin scar she made no effort to hide. She delivered her postponed keynote address via video link, speaking about how justice is not a guarantee, but a responsibility that requires vigilance and courage. She declined book deals and fame, but her case became a landmark for accountability. A $4.2 million settlement was reached, and the Hartwell Reform Act was introduced in Congress to mandate federal oversight of airport police departments. In her chambers, she kept her shattered glasses mounted in a simple black frame on her desk. When visitors asked about them, she gave the same answer: a reminder that justice, though sometimes broken, can be repaired. This case was disturbing, but the one on the right ends in a way no one expects. Would you like me to find more details on the legislative impact of the Hartwell Reform Act, or perhaps draft a summary of the internal affairs report mentioned in the case?